Insofar as the church calendar and, of course, the lectionary, which is driven by it, are concerned, we're still in ordinary time. And this is that season that begins between Pentecost and the beginning of Advent. So we're still in that. And during this ordinary time, the lectionary doesn't try to present any kind of a coherent theme for any individual Sunday, but rather it tends to try and work our way through various books of the Bible so that we can be exposed to as much of it as we can. Even so, even though there's no particular theme planned during these Sundays in ordinary time or kingdom time, depending on how you've been brought up to refer to that, at times a thread of commonality will appear. And that's the case really this Sunday. We visit our Old Testament lesson from Jeremiah, a New Testament lesson from 1 Timothy, and the Gospel lesson from Luke. And all of these are installments on our journey through those books in this year C of our lectionary, but there's more. There really is. Because each passage, in its own way, deals with what you could call investment strategies and their consequences. They do. In our Old Testament lesson, we find Jeremiah at a very, very dark time in his life. He is locked away in prison at a time when Jerusalem itself is imprisoned by the Babylonian army that is besieging it. And in this time of apparent hopelessness, things look very dark. God does something interesting. God tells Jeremiah to go buy a field that's outside town on the other side of the besieging army. Imagine that. Just when things look about as dark as they can possibly be, God tells Jeremiah to invest in real estate. And that seems incredibly foolish at first glance, but in telling Jeremiah to buy that field, God was actually telling Jeremiah to invest in more than real estate. You see, Jeremiah was to invest in God. Jeremiah notes that the Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel, proclaims, houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land. Even in the very darkest of times in our lives, those don't have the final say. God will provide better lives for God's people. So when Jeremiah bought that field, he was investing in more than real estate. Jeremiah was investing in faith in God, trusting that God would do what God had promised. He was investing. Let's pause for a minute just to talk about this notion of investing, just so we're kind of clear about what that is. Because to invest, one of the definitions of that is to put valuable resources into something you expect will give you a personal or financial gain. Right? Another example of investing would be to put time into building a relationship with another person. Or to buy stocks, buying them at a low price and selling them at a higher price. So to invest really is to put valuable resources, those things that matter to us, to work so that we can gain in one fashion or another. We all understand that. Most all of us do. And most of the time when we talk about investing, we're thinking about investing financially. And it's safe enough to say that a lot of us have our own investment strategies, planning for retirement or maybe college funds, and so on, which is good. But there's more to life than financial gain. And we need to realize that financial gain, as attractive as it is to us, as beneficial as it undoubtedly is, still cannot meet our greatest existential need. So our investment strategies really need to account for that reality. Sometimes we get all hung up on one thing and miss out the problems that it causes. In our New Testament lesson today, Paul warns about being overly concerned with money when he says, that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some have wandered away from the faith and have impaled themselves with a lot of pain because they made money their goal. You see, money in and of itself is not bad. It's very necessary, but when the acquisition of money becomes our top priority, we are setting ourselves up for failure because there are more important things which require an investment from us. Paul goes on to write. He says, instead of fixating on money, instead he says, pursue righteousness, holy living, faithfulness, love, endurance, and gentleness. Compete in the good fight of faith. Grab hold of eternal life. You see, what he's telling us is that the people of God need to invest in those behaviors and those attitudes that nurture our faith in God. And at the same time we're doing that, we're helping to make a better world in which to live. It's all happening at the same time as we invest in those behaviors that make our quality of life better and improve the quality of lives for our neighbors. And we need to be careful about what we invest in. Luke's parable, or Jesus' parable that's recorded in Luke's gospel, we see a cautionary tale that warns us of the consequences of investing in the wrong things. Do you see, it's a famous story, right? But Jesus tells us that when this rich man who had invested heavily in his own comfort and chose not to invest in the welfare of any of his neighbors dies, he finds that the money that he had been so intent on enjoying during his earthly life was, at this point in time, of absolutely no benefit to him whatsoever. In this parable, Jesus is basically telling us that the time to invest in behaviors that are faithful to God's will and beneficial to our spiritual development, the time to do that is while we can still do it. Because once our earthly lives end, our ability to invest ends at that point. And at the end of our earthly lives, we can only collect what we have invested up to that point. We face all kinds of challenges, all kinds of temptations in our day-to-day lives, and what appears to be the easiest path may not always be best. Because sometimes we just take the default path of least resistance, but it's not always the best for us. In times of uncertainty and times of great physical or emotional pain, there's a tendency to kind of withdraw from the world, to distance ourselves from those things or people that are making us uncomfortable or frightening us or hurting us. We can be tempted at that in those dark times to turn inward, investing our time and our treasures and our talents only on those things that appeal to our self-centered nature. However, just as with the rich man in Jesus' parable, those things cannot give us what we most need, you and I. What we really need to do in good times and in bad is to invest in God, to believe in His promises, to trust His power, because we need His power at work in our lives. Especially in those really dark times that leave us feeling isolated, powerless, all alone. You know, that passage that we visited from Jeremiah earlier, it tells us something important. Sometimes we gloss over that. But it tells us something important. And that is that even in the very darkest of times, and we're all going to experience those dark times if we have not yet already done so, even in the very darkest of times that we encounter, God is still God, fully God, undiminished in power, undiminished in love, and always with us to give us the strength and the guidance that we need. God can and God will deliver us from the adversities of life on this earth. And even more important than that, God has a glorious future waiting for all who will come to Him in faith. Nothing on this earth can prevent God from fulfilling those plans that God has, those marvelous redemptive plans that will lead us to a glorious everlasting life at His side. Nothing you can buy on earth will do that. So remember that truth and invest in a faithful relationship with God. Our investment strategy, yours and mine, needs to acknowledge short-term, present-day needs, as well as what we're all going to need in the long term. So we need to realize that we need to do some things right here and now that will benefit us now and also benefit us in the future. That's what Paul is talking about. We need to follow that advice. Pursue righteousness, Paul says. Do you catch that first word? Pursue. That means to go after it with deliberation, not to just sit there and wait for stuff to fall in your lap. Pursue righteousness, holy living, faithfulness, love, endurance, and gentleness, and compete in the good fight of faith. And when we do that, we are simultaneously investing in the present day, which makes our world a better place in which to live, and through faithful obedience of God's will, we're also investing in our future. Or as Paul puts it, grabbing hold of eternal life. Eternal life. The ultimate long-term investment. Brothers and sisters, the purpose of most investment strategies is to provide a better life. So let your investment strategy guide you to invest your time, invest your talents, invest your love in God and God's redemptive plans for God's creation and your neighbors, so that you can have a better life now and enjoy a glorious, perfect life for all of the days that are to come. Let your investment strategy reflect that. And give thanks and praise to God for the investment opportunities that He provides you. Amen.